Bobby Broyles and Tim McDonald here. Should be a really interesting matchup.
Buckle up. If you're not watching, you got some problems.
Good to see you, CA football fans. 2 weeks are in the books, and our latest edition of This Week in CA Football, presented by Geico, looks ahead to Week 3. Tim McDonald is my co-host. I'm Bobby Broyles. A different but solid showing for the league after going 7-0 in non-conference FCS play on Saturday, with Albany earning a win in the conference opener at Rhode Island.
Got to start with the Great Danes. Again, second straight week. We're talking about the Great Danes,
Yes,
and rightfully so. 2-0 overall, 1-0 in CA football, which is probably more important. 35-7. I mean, Bidick Hanks was a monster in the second half. Game was close in the first half, but ultimately 3 rushing touchdowns, 178 yards. Albany just absolutely set the tone with the run game. Rushed 52 times versus just 16 pass attempts. A key win because it's a conference win, but a key win too. The confidence just keeps building for that team. Break into the national polls for you, Albany, for the first time since 2014. Now you get to stay home for 3 straight games. CA football, 10-1 now overall versus FCS foes. The 7-0 week, as you mentioned, it included a 2-0 record versus the MEAC, a 3-0 record versus the Patriot. But the key last week, a bunch of slow starts, a bunch of what's going on over there. But it's a good thing, I think, moving forward, because a little bit of a wake up. Week 3's here, you got to bring it every week. Yep. No FBS wins in 3 tries, but again, CA football still tied for the lead across the FCS with 2 overall. Yep. Slow starts with a theme, but impressively, you look at the teams right now, 2-0. Richmond, Delaware, Albany, and JMU, all 2-0. Yeah. Danes and Dukes and Spiders probably had the most impressive performances overall in Week 2, but the common theme, I mean, Stony, Brook, and Maine, we talked about them a lot in the first week, lost to FBS foes, just show you the difference between FBS teams and non-conference play early. It can change and alter a lot of teams early on.
Yes, it can. Conference play gets a little more interesting this Saturday with 2 matchups that will be televised by TV partners Comcast Sportsnet and the American Sports Network. Before those games, let's open with a Friday night contest on the American Sports Network when Rhode Island visits Harvard at 7 o'clock. A little Friday night lights action
Second
here.
straight year, Rhodey plays Harvard in Harvard's first game of the year. This is obviously going to be Rhodey's 3rd game. Despite the 35-7 loss, you have to take some positives, and I know it's tough, but 14-7 at half and 21-7 through 3 quarters for Rhodey. I didn't think the game was completely out of reach, but all of a sudden, there were 2 interceptions were returned. Wes McCoy had 3 interceptions. We saw Paul Miraz play a little bit. I think both are going to get a chance this Friday versus a very good Harvard team, a Harvard team that is receiving votes nationally. I mean, good news is TJ Anderson rushed for 82 yards. That was a career high. Also had a touchdown. Tied that game in the first quarter, and it slowly but surely, though, I thought Albany did a good job of just pounding, and that really hurt Rhodey. Harold Cooper, very limited. Didn't see him probably a little bit more serious of an injury than we thought. Only 1 rushing attempt, 1 reception. Hopefully he's healthy this week. That will only help Rhodey even more. Harvard shared the Ivy League title last year in 2015, but they lost the QB. That was the Offensive Player of the Year in the Ivy. Harvard also has to replace 5 of its top tacklers from last season. I think that's good news. And Harvard's first game of the season, so Rhodey's coming out. I know it's tough right now, looking at an 0-2, and you haven't scored a lot of points, but a Friday night game against a very good opponent, I think it's a good opportunity to flush the first 2 games and move forward.
8 more games set for Saturday, beginning with a conference doubleheader at noon as Stony Brook plays host to the number 2 team in the country, the Richmond Spiders.
I'm really, really looking forward to this because we know one thing. One of these teams, win or lose, someone has a great chance to make a statement on Saturday.
Yes, they do.
2 totally different weeks and 2 totally different opponents. Stony Brook got shut out at FBS Temple, 38-0, only had 49 rushing yards, 84 passing yards, kind of uncharacteristic. Stony Brook defense played sometimes bad, but I mean 301 yards of offense given up. That's not horrible against an FBS team. 124 yards of those were against the pass, but 28-0 hole at halftime. That's hard for any team in an FBS situation to come back from. Another story for Richmond. Almost the complete opposite. 34-0 shutout over Norfolk State. Defense gave up 122 total yards. First shutout for Richmond since 2014. 2-0 for the first time since 2011. We saw David Jones, first career punt return for a touchdown. We saw Kyle Aletta. Same Kyle Aletta, boys looked ready. Brian Brown and Tyra Wilkins for the second straight game, both had touchdowns receiving. They got their numbers. The tough news, we didn't really know, but tough news we found out on Monday. Gordon Collins, hat goes off to him. A tough deal. He tore his ACL. He's going to miss the rest of the year, so that's going to hurt the running back situation for Richmond, which was a question mark coming in. The story of this game is going to be, Stony Brook's playing at home. Obviously, a disappointing effort last week. Richmond has to hit the road, but who's going to be able to run the ball? Deontez Thompson and Xavier Goodall, the 2 running backs for Richmond, they're going to have to step up. 2 guys who are both freshmen and redshirt freshmen, Stacey Vidal and Jordan Goins. whoever can run the ball and set the tone, I think Richmond's going to be able to move the ball, but I also think Richmond hasn't faced, despite the teams that Richmond has already played, I don't think Richmond's played a defense quite like Stony Brook's, vice versa. Yeah. I know they played an FBS team, but Stony Brook hasn't faced an offense like Richmond yet. Interesting matchup to watch. I think watch the line of scrimmage in that one for the run game.
When that game ends, switch over to Comcast Sportsnet at 3:30 for Towson at Villanova in Philly. Both teams struggled earlier last week and came back from behind to win at home.
One of those games, we were texting back and forth. You look at it and what's going on? A little bit of a slow struggle, and then the second half, things started to come along and come together. The struggles were real, though, for each in the first half. But in order to come back, Villanova comes back versus Lehigh, gets a late touchdown and a defensive stand to pull out the 26-21 win. We knew that was going to be a close game. Yep. Towson and St. Francis, Coach Ambrose and Towson and us, we talked about. St. Francis is a very good team. Towson trailed that game by 18, outscored the Red Flash 22-0 in the second half for a 35-28 win. Just a very good matchup this week for both of these teams to open up conference play, because there were so many strange stats and so many strange things going on last week that this is a toss-up. I mean,
it is.
Villanova last week rushed for 396 yards, the most for Villanova since 2009. Javon White had a breakout day, career high 155 yards, 2 touchdowns rushing. Bednarczyk had 92 yards, and Aaron Forbes, really impressed with him, 87 yards and 1 touchdown. Nova only passed for 56 yards, though. I mean, we thought that would maybe be a strong suit for Nova coming into this year, but the rush game was evident. The rush attack was evident versus Lehigh. Towson only rushed for 114 yards on 39 attempts, complete opposite.
Yep.
Ellis Knudsen, I mean, comes out of nowhere.
Yes.
All he did was throw 10 completions for 301 yards, 2 huge touchdowns to Christian Summers. Christian Summers, Offensive Player of the Week in CA football, 6 catches, 232 yards. First Towson player to have 200 yards receiving since 2005. Going way back to the Sean Schaefer days. For you older CA fans who might appreciate that one. I don't know. Expect the unexpected this week. Both teams can make a huge statement and huge progress with a win. Both had to battle and find a way last week. They got it done. Interesting. I mean, there's a lot on the line already for a conference opener for both teams. Interested to see what's going to happen, because last week was a toss-up.
Yep, those 2 conference games should be very fun to watch on Saturday. Also at 3:30 on Comcast Sportsnet and ACC Regional Networks, the top scoring and rushing offense in the FCS, and JMU hits the road for the first time this year to Chapel Hill to take on the North Carolina Tar Heels.
We saw the white streamers everywhere. We saw the JMU whiteout. I mean, we know just how potent this JMU offense is. I mean, I haven't seen them in person, but we've seen the stats. The numbers speak for themselves. Number 1 in scoring, number 1 in rushing, number 1 in total offense. 16 total touchdowns, 562 yards per game. We can go on and on. 4 players, at least 150 yards rushing or more. But at the same time, Morehead State and Central Connecticut State are not North Carolina.
No, they're not.
And you look at, although that is the case, and we know it's going to be a much tougher opponent, and offensively, can you expect those numbers? I don't know if you can. But Brian Shore has impressed me, despite the 2 opponents. I know it's a completely different monster, but 78% passing, 25 of 32, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. I mean, of course, when you have a rush attack like that, it's only going to open up the pass game. He needs to play well. He needs to keep doing what he's been doing best, which is not turning the ball over, keep the offense moving if they want to have any shot in this game. North Carolina is 1-1, lost that game in Georgia in week 1, also beat Illinois last week. Larry Fedora teams, though, I mean, have beaten FCS foes by a 40-plus point margin since he's been there in 8 contests. Tar Heels have Pitt and at Florida State after JMU, so you hope that's good for JMU rolling in. And on the other hand, JMU and that offense, absolutely nothing to lose. I mean, how do you ignore, too, JMU's special teams play? 3 times this season, JMU has had a player field and return a punt in the stats, and all 3 times it's been a touchdown. You look at Rashard Davis, John Miller. I mean, so if I'm UNC, I'm not punting the ball. I'm kicking it out of bounds. Easier said than done, but JMU, it's going to be a different beast this week. The offense, though, I think is going to have UNC asking some questions and maybe preparing a little bit more harder for an FCS opponent.
Indeed. A pair of games start at 6 o'clock, first with Elon returning home to take on Fayetteville State on CA.TV.
The only non-Division I, not an FCS, not an FBS game. On the whole schedule this season, Fayetteville State, a game that Elon, just schedule-wise, had to work in there. I think it's a good chance to come back home, get regrouped a little bit, an 0-2 start, but takeaways from last week, a loss to Charlotte, a tough loss. Daniel Thompson, though, did set a career high, 29 completions, 50 passing attempts, and 322 yards. So kind of explains to you what Elon's method might be moving forward. Freshman wide receivers, Jeremiah Bridges, 5 catches, 86 yards. Cole Taylor had 67 yards receiving. That's a good sign for Elon, too. I thought they ran the ball a little bit better despite the score. Held Charlotte, to 0 first downs in the first quarter and led 7-0. But as it is against an FBS team, in the second half, the depth of the FCS kind of took over, and Elon ultimately lost that game. How do you respond? I think that's what I believe Coach Skrosky will look at and tell his players this week. You know, We lost the first 2 games. We haven't scored a lot of points, but it's our final non-conference game before William & Mary, Villanova, UNH, Richmond. I mean, you get into the heart of the schedule here. How do you respond at home? Are you going to give in and say, oh, man, we're already 0-2? Or are you going to respond and set the tone for the rest of the season moving forward?
Yeah, big game, even though it is a non-FCS opponent for Elon. The Green and Gold faithful have been waiting for the Tribe to play in the newly renovated Zabel Stadium, and they will get that chance when William & Mary takes on Norfolk State on CA.TV.
Norfolk State, a team we already talked about.
Yes,
That got shut out at Richmond. Tribe started slow at Hampton. I mean, a lot of teams last week. That was the theme for many teams up and down this. 7-7 at halftime. You're thinking to yourself, all right, maybe they'll get the offense going. And they did. William & Mary responded with 3 straight scores to open up the second half on all 3 possessions of that second half. Steve Cooley passed for 302 yards and 2 touchdowns. I thought he played pretty well. Devontae Dedmon, though, I mean, took over when his team needed it. And we talked about he might have to do this a lot this year.
Yeah.
Not to say that the Tribe don't have many receiving options, but when he gets the ball in space and when he has time and William & Mary can get him the ball, he proved that that offense can move through him. 8 catches, a career-high 176 yards, and 1 touchdown. Like I said, they're going to need that from him week in and week out. Funderburk also, I thought, did a better job in the second half. A big 40-yard touchdown run, also had 69 total yards. We saw the run game for the Tribe slowly develop. Not really sure with Anderson. We think the shoulder's hurt. We think his ankle is hurt, so keep an eye on that. But Funderburk right now looks like he can be a reliable backup.
Yep.
The Tribe, I mean, a newly renovated stadium. You finished the second half strong last week. Should be able to control the line of scrimmage. Like I said, Norfolk State only had 122 yards versus Richmond last week, so you take that as a positive. The excitement, I think, will take over and ultimately get this team back on track. It's not any win is a good win. You don't have to have an excuse for winning a game, even in fashion like you did at Hampton last week. I think being at home in a beautiful, renovated stadium is only going to help the Tribe moving forward. I'm really excited just to see highlights and see the new stadium in the background. That's going to be awesome.
Exactly. It should be an exciting night at Zabel Stadium in Williamsburg at 6:30 on ESPN3 and the Watch ESPN app. The Delaware Blue Hens square off against another ACC opponent in Wake Forest.
Interesting matchup because here I come in and the Hens came from behind last week at Lafayette, especially in the second half. I mean, Thomas Jefferson and Jalen Randolph kind of got it done in the second half. Both had over 100 yards, scored twice. Deontay Cherry, a 35-yard touchdown on a 4th and 6. That made it 17-6.
Yep.
If you asked me last year, would Delaware have done that with Joe Walker and Deontay Cherry? I don't think they would have. But I think that goes to show you how much Delaware has improved. Really impressed me overall with Delaware's ability. Even though things got tight, even though it was close in the second half, still were able to rush for 276 yards and stick to that ground game. Interesting note, Wake Forest, 2-0. Coach Dave Clawson, we know him.
Yes, we
State
do.
of football knows him well, has some ties to Richmond, has some other ties around the conference, but moved to 2-0, won at Duke 24-14. Both teams love to set the tone on the ground first. Interesting though, Wake allows 233 passing yards, so okay, can Delaware maybe, I don't know, but we know Delaware's tactic is to hit the ground running.
Yep.
Only 91.5 allowed rushing. So how can the Blue Hens use that to their advantage? I think it's Joe Walker. Much like Brian Shore of of James Madison, you need to take care of the ball. Walker, the second straight game, passed for 66 yards, but he also threw a touchdown and no picks. If he can do that, I think Delaware's going to have a chance. We know about Delaware's offense rushing over 300 yards. No FBS team wants to think about that or prepare for that. Wes Hills, the tough news for Delaware, we learned he's going to be out for at least a couple of weeks with a dislocated elbow. So Thomas Jefferson and Randolph take the load if you're Delaware. The good news is their depth. You have that ability.
I was going to say they have the deepest depth in the league at running back. They should be just fine.
Yep.
After an exciting win at its new home on Saturday, New Hampshire goes on the road to take on the only other Division I program in the state of New Hampshire, visiting Dartmouth at 7 o'clock.
UNH had 13,000 plus at the new home opener of the Wildcat Stadium. It was really nice to see because so many times New Hampshire has played home and people have come into the dungeon and said, what's going on here? It's nice to have some pride. A lot of people, so many people were just happy to finally see that stadium come to life. An interesting start, 14-0 down to Holy Cross, and it's 21-7, and people are kind of shaking their head, but the run game, New Hampshire stuck to it and found out that they were going to have success. I think that only helped Trevor Knight. I know he had a couple of turnovers. I know didn't play exactly early on as well as the Wildcats wanted to, but finished with 2 touchdowns passing, 87 rush yards. New Hampshire rushed for over 360 yards. Dalton Crossan, a career high 199 yards and 2 touchdowns. Trayvon Bryant had 79. I thought the run game ultimately took over, and the defense in the second half adjusted very well. Holy Cross has a very good quarterback. We talked about him last week, Peter Pujols, who we'll talk about next, I think, as well. I mean, this is a Dartmouth team like Harvard in the Ivy. It's Dartmouth's season opener. UNH actually hasn't lost in this series since 1976. They don't play every year, but there are a lot of people in this state, in New Hampshire, in the program, on both programs. This game means a lot. And I know there might be only 2 Division I teams in the state, but it really does mean a lot. And I think New Hampshire, that momentum carrying over from the second half will help them moving forward on 7 o'clock on Saturday night.
Yep. The team we talked about earlier closes out week 3 at home as Albany hosts Holy Cross at 7 o'clock in the Danes home opener.
Sussman and Crook both played last week.
Yes,
DJ Crook came in the second half. Sussman only had under 10 yards in the first half, but you didn't need to throw the ball when you're Albany. You set the game with the ground. 35-7 win like we talked about, but how do you handle the 2-0 start if you're Greg Gattuso? You didn't really pass the ball that well, but you rushed the ball a heck of a lot better. Abitikin Hanks, I mean, we talked about him. 141 yards per game right now. I know there's only been 2 games, but still have to be happy with that progress.
Yeah.
Holy Cross is 1-1 overall. We mentioned that loss to New Hampshire last week. Did pass for 427 yards, though. And we mentioned Albany leads the FCS and is tied with Delaware right now with 6 total interceptions, so keep an eye on that. Albany's going to try to stop the pass. I think that's obvious. Pujols attempted 62 passes last week. Stop the pass and you can win this game. It's going to be a tough opponent, though. Albany allows only 163 yards passing, and like we said, returned 2 touchdowns for picks last week. Albany's defense has come up and shown, and I think that more impressive than Albany's start has been the defense to me. I want to see them progress this week against a pass-happy Holy Cross team that proved that it could do that against UNH last week. If Albany gets to 3-0, I mean, talk about going to stay home the next couple of weeks. We talk about the next home games for the Great Danes moving forward. I think that should be a really good game to end week 3.
Speaking of that defense, Gattuso said it at Media Day. We couldn't, how many times he said it, the defense has to get better. They have certainly responded here early in the season. If you need to find links to watch live streams or follow along, cafootball.com has all that for you. You can also find television clearance information for games being broadcast in your area. Now, the duo of this guy right here and Mike Windley made their on-campus debut at New Hampshire last week. Not only did you guys get to witness the new Wildcat Stadium in person, but I know you guys also were able to help tell a story that needs to be heard. The first Going Deep feature of 2016 debuts on Thursday on cafootball.com.
I mean, just phenomenal, great trip, great start to the on-campus features. Couldn't have asked for a better crowd, a better game. I mean, Wildcat Stadium was everything you could ask for and more. And I know Mike and I, and all of CA football, all of us here, all of our crew, are honored to tell the story of Todd Walker, a lasting legacy, not only that he had on the program, that he continues to have with the program, a really powerful story that I think a lot of people will be moved by. And I know we still have 5 more trips planned this fall, so CA football on-campus trips just getting started. You said you can get that on cafootball.com as well, on our social media platforms, Twitter at CA football, Instagram, and Facebook as well. We'll have those for you on Thursday.
We look forward to seeing that on Thursday, like you said. Until then, enjoy the games this weekend, everyone.